You got a microphone. Yeah, there you go.
There's one good thing about getting old. You can get more men.
Okay.
Yeah, it's got to be that kind of show.
You know, I was trying to think of some things. Oh, thank you very much for coming. I was trying to think of some things to share with Halloween and Haunted Mansion super fans. You know, because there's the Haunted Mansion's history is pretty well known and it's pretty well told. But I think I have some things here that are going to be of some interest to you all. So, does it work? Okay. So we're going to start with a picture here of the Stour Castle in Kansas City. Now, probably most of you have never heard of this in relation to the Haunted Mansion. And I'm going to admit this very first little bit here I'm going to talk about is a little conjecture, but that's what I like to do. So we're going to do some conjecting. And this mansion was rumored to be haunted in Kansas City at the time, by the time Walt was just starting out with iWorks, starting to get his professional role as trying to get working in films and things in Kansas City. And you'll see, let me see if my laser is pointing here. You'll notice this little, this is a castle that was in Kansas City. Now, for reasons I won't get into, I believe that Walt was well aware of this building. He had a friend who was a relative of someone that was associated with the Stour family. And if we move forward to this, now you might recognize this picture. This is a picture that Harper Goff drew for Walt Disney when Walt was thinking of just, maybe I could have a haunted house, and this I think dates back to 1951, well before Disneyland ever was thought of. I think Harper may have been thinking in terms of, Walt may have been thinking of putting a little park by the studio in Burbank at this time, but you'll notice it has some very similar features to the Stour Castle. Now, I think that is a total coincidence, but what I'm going to point out to you here is that there's a lot of total coincidences in the development of the Haunted Mansion, some of which were fruitful and some of which were not. But that's just, all of this is to say, every theme park Walt Disney had a hand in developing, which would be Disneyland, of course, his Mickey Mouse Park, the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World, and also Riverside, is that what it was called? The park in, they were thinking of building in Ohio. Do you remember, is that called Riverside Park? I think Riverside. That park also, all those parks, he planned on having a haunted house in there. And in fact, the Riverside Park, it was going to be the main thing when you walked into the gates. And you wouldn't see a big castle at the end of the road, you'd see a hill with a haunted house. So it was clear that Walt Disney, from the very beginning, had in his mind Americana and small town America involves the haunted house on the hill on the side of the road, as you can see in Harper Goff's picture here. So I'm going to try to quickly get through some things. This, we're going to skip forward to about, well, no, this is 1950. This book came out right here, Decorative Art of Victoria's Era by Francis Lipton. Now, right around 1951, of course, is when Harper Goff drew that picture. And in the mid-50s is when Ken Anderson started drawing pictures of haunted houses. So this was a new book in the Disney library at that time. Inside this book, there is this photograph. And this book was published in 1950. So, and his house, his picture was taken, I believe, in 1937. So, that looks familiar, you might say. So, you hear stories about the development of the architecture of the Haunted Mansion. The truth is, there was not a lot of change once Ken Anderson found this house and then drew this one. So you can see he did not even really change the perspective. And then, of course, Sam McKinn finished it off so they could show Walt Disney, and this is the famous drawing we have of the Haunted Mansion today. So, Alice, I know that when they were talking about the Haunted Mansion, Mark specifically with Walt, he had asked him, about should it be scary, should it be funny. Can you talk a little bit about Mark and Walt's conversation about the Haunted Mansion being funny versus scary?
Yes.
Use your microphone.
I'll never get used to this. No, the thing that Mark wanted to ask Walt about was that he wanted the haunted house And he said, I want you to do something funny in it. But he said, what I want most of all is I want the outside of it pristine clean. And I want the lawn mowed. And I want the flowers looking very nice. And I don't want anything to have to do with being haunted or anything else. It's just going to be the haunted house. But he said, I want it clean. He said, I want all the parents to see that my park is clean. And they're not going to get dirty or poisoned or anything else. They're going to have a place where they can come and have a wonderful time, and the whole family can enjoy it together. And he said, then when you go in the house, you can do anything you want, make it as haunted as you want, and so on. And Mark said, well, do you want something like the Adam family? And he said, no. He said, I want it to be what we would have it. And he said, we have a lot of people working on this, and we'll come into what will be a good haunted house, but it has to be pristine clean, because I want them to know I have a clean park.
Yeah, that's right. So that's why this painting, when actually I've heard Sam McKinn talk about, when this painting was shown to Walt Disney, Walt said, that's not what we're looking for. Of course, the architecture obviously was what they were looking for, but all the bats and the spooky moss, that's what Alice is saying. None of that. We're going to keep it nice and clean. So, stepping back in time a little bit to the 50s again, a lot of the Imagineers worked on the Haunted Mansion. It wasn't, you hear a lot about Mark Davis, who we're going to talk about quite a bit in a little bit, Claude Coates, but there were a lot of, originally, before they got too far into the development, a lot of the artists that were working for Walt came up with ideas. Now this is by Bruce Bushman, who did a lot of Fantasyland work, but you can see he had an idea for some giant portraits that were menacing, which is something that actually made its way all the way into the actual Haunted Mansion. So for a moment I'll talk about Ken Anderson. Ken Anderson, of course, was the person that Walt first said, okay, I want you to make the Haunted Mansion. He wanted him to kind of run the program at first. So in the late 50s, I think around 1957, he drew that picture of the haunted house, and then he started putting together little mock-ups, and I think Ken Anderson even had a room in the studio where he would mock up big life-size versions of his effects, and so we're going to have to not talk a lot about that part of the Haunted Mansion's development today, but just suffice to say that Ken Anderson, and here's a sketch that Ken Anderson did. So you can see he had the idea of, kind of a haunted-looking house. Spider webs, cracked plaster, there's a ghost at the end of the hall. Kind of a traditional haunted house. And somehow it never really worked out. He had some very intricate plans for the Haunted Mansion, actually, and that wasn't precisely, I suppose, what Walt was looking for. Ken Anderson went on back to animation, and then later on, E.L. Gracie and Rolly Crump came into the picture and started working on the Haunted Mansion. So here's some construction photos of the Haunted Mansion, just building it in Anaheim. And there's the Haunted Mansion when it first opened. You can see the beautiful bronze plaques that probably were that way for less than a year before they turned to the beautiful patina that we have today. So, and then this is Walt Disney World. This is just to show you an example of kind of the scale of the ride you're in. You can see that's the space it takes, and of course this isn't the whole building, but that small facade, and that's even bigger. That facade right there is probably about the size of Disneyland's. They kept, no, maybe that is the whole thing. But at any rate, it's obviously, and you'd be surprised how many people still think you walk into that house and everything happens and you come back out. I get that a lot. People think that's what's involved. So, but that's a little bit about the history. There's E.L. Gracie working on some special effects. He and Rolly Crump sequestered themselves and just came up with all kinds of crazy things. And then I'll mention also Harriet Burns, who was in the model shop. Here's a model she built of one of Mark's characters, the Hatbox Ghost. He's kind of famous. This is a mock-up of the attic and him and his place. And then, of course, right here is the Hatbox Ghost. This is the only photo, by the way, of the Hatbox Ghost in the Haunted Mansion that I know of. There's a little video also out there that someone caught of kind of going by him in the mansion, but that's the only picture. Okay, oops, let's go back. Okay, so another Harriet's mock-ups. There's a conveyance there in the middle and some people sitting there. So, you know, pretty quickly after Ken Anderson left his role at the Haunted Mansion, the designers realized we're going to need to take people through this on some kind of a conveyance, walking through, because Walt did a lot of, he visited he or some of his Imagineers visited quite a few walking tours, like Hearst Castle, Winchester Mystery House, trying to figure out, you know, how does this work and how many people can we take on a tour of a big building. And they finally decided, you know, it's going to have a conveyance. And fortunately, we have on stage someone here who knows a little something about conveyance at Disney parks. So, Bob, I was wondering if you might talk to us a little bit about, maybe back before the Haunted Mansion. I know the Haunted Mansion we'll talk about in a moment, but when you really started thinking of conveyances for the Disney parks, when did that all really begin? How did that come up from Walt and the parks deciding we're going to...
You gotta watch out, between the two of us, it's 170 years. Well, all right. Well, thank you, Jeff. You know, I thought this was going to be a simple panel. No, it's a trade show. I walked around. I saw animated intestines falling out of bodies. And I noticed everybody dresses in black. However, you will note my shoes are blood red. And I learned just before I came in, this really, truly is a cult. I saw you all stand up, salute, and stared at the words. And what am I in here for? Well, I'll talk about the mansion. As some of you know, at White Enterprises in those days, we had a lot of people working on a lot of different things. None of these projects ever started and stopped. They were a kind of a blend of activities over a long period of time, with Walt just kind of sifting a bunch of ideas through a bunch of people. And obviously, and by 1951, Walt wanted a Haunted Mansion. And then, of course, the closer we get, there's more gags to do with the show. Yale Gracie was really the leader of that pack, along with Rolly Crump. And Walt just gave Yale this room and said, well, just go in there and play, do something, anything you want. No deadlines, no nothing. So every once in a while you'd walk by the hallway by Yale's office, and then he'd open the door like a creaky door and he says, come in. And he's got a gag, he wants to show you a gag. Because, you know, we mock up a gag and then, of course, we convert it into a real show action equipment. But he would do stuff, and some of you who you know all the history of Yale Gracie, some of these gags would scare the daylights out of the janitors at night and they wouldn't go back in there. But over time, we did a lot of mock-ups at the studio on a soundstage. So at some point in time, around 1962, over at 800 Sonora, where all of us were finally moved out of the studio into one building, we had a large drafting room, and there was a number of drafting, you know, mechanical people, architectural people, graphics people, and it was led by a guy by the name of Harvey Gillette, who was a real dyed-in-the-wool classic architect type of designer. And somehow in 1962, even before this Haunted Mansion project was underway, he talked Walt into the fact that, well, let's just go ahead and design it, because he wanted to design it. He took Anderson's sketches, and he laid out that building, and he personally drew almost all the drawings for that structure. And something I never understood, somehow there was approval to go ahead and build that building long before the show was figured out, and years before it was ever going to be a mechanical attraction. So that's a curious point of timing, that normally we would say, okay, we're going to do a whole project, and then we would do it down at the park. This house suddenly just showed up because Harvey wanted it. Simple as that. And as you can appreciate in the previous picture he showed you, people think, well, how are you going to get all that stuff in the house? Well, if you look at aerial photos of Disneyland, you'll see that the attraction is way out behind a railroad, and there's this big steel bridge that was built in order to have the train go over the top of the walkway where after you go down through the elevator, you go out in the back. All that had been figured out before we knew what the heck we're going to do. And then, backing up to early 1966, we had a new attraction called the Voyage Through Inner Space. And how many of you knew what was going on in that dark ride? No. That wasn't called a dark ride for nothing, yeah? If you get my drift there, yeah? But anyway, coming out of the New York World's Fair 64, 65, I had looked at a lot of the different conveyances that we had at the fair, and several of them kind of intrigued me. One of them was the AT&T thing, where it was a chain of vehicles. So just sitting there in John Hench's office one day, you guys all know this, I'm sitting there and I pick up his candied apple and I'm talking about, you know, if we could have a show where we could direct the audience into the different scenes, so we would segue through a story and we could just put people, we just kind of twirl them, and I twirl the apple and I said, yeah, and then we could put it on a track, goes up and down, turns right and left, and we just turn the car relative to the chassis. A conversation just as quick as that. And I said, yeah, I can turn in all directions. And since I was an airplane pilot at that time, one of the navigational aids is called an Omni, meaning all around. So we're going to move, Omni Mover. So just in a quick conversation, that name started as just a place setting, got stuck with it. This whole darn thing's all called Omni Mover now. But then they said, well, let's get going on a thing for Monsanto. We'll use it there. And then I figured out a gag where you have a rotating turntable, and for certain technical reasons that had some advantages. So the car actually was designed for the Monsanto attraction, but as I was developing that, we had a little test track at the back of the warehouse at 1401 Flower in Glendale. And the Haunted Mansion people came over and looked at this thing and says, oh my gosh, we can make it a ride-through. It solves all the problems. Walt said it's not going to work as a walk-through. So a lot of history, people think, oh, the Omnimover came first and was in the Haunted Mansion. Haunted Mansion picked up an idea in the middle of the development of a test for Monsanto. That's how this history gets all goofed up here.
Okay.
That was it?
That's great.
Okay.
Yeah, and as you can see, you know, and the Omnimover.
I have to take it. It gets dried out here.
Yeah, please do. I do too. And as
Do you think that's water? You know, one of your exhibitors here, he loaned me this, and he says, it's Zombie Princess. Ooh, I like this. What is this?
You got me.
Look, that's what it says, Zombie
It
Princess.
does say Zombie Princess.
Ooh, that's a new kind of martini.
Now look at,
You can go ahead now.
look at this. I want you to look at this picture. So you can see the Omnivores here are, it's more than just a little carriage that you sit in. You know, it's actually the bulk of it is what is underneath. And so when you're in the Haunted Mansion, you're actually raised up on a false floor through the whole thing, so that the Omnimover has room to function.
Where did you get that picture?
I can't exactly tell you where I got that.
That is a big rat's nest of stuff. What's going on? Look, that looks like a repair job.
It probably is. I'm assuming that's why they're...
Yeah, because on the left of the picture, that bright colored thing,
Yeah.
that's actually a surfboard.
That is?
Yeah, when you have a cover the track between the vehicles, it looks like a surfboard, so it's officially known as the surfboard.
Oh, that's what you call it, surfboard.
Ah, so you didn't know that,
I didn't
did
know
you?
that. And now we're getting super nerdy, so... Okay. Well, thank you, Bob. Now we're going to talk a little bit about Mark Davis. Now this, you might recognize this painting here. This is one of many concept sketches and paintings that Mark Davis did for the Haunted Mansion. Many of them made their way into the Haunted Mansion, and many of them didn't. Now, I'm kind of excited that we're able to share with you today some of Mark's artwork that either didn't quite make it into the mansion, or things that you just might not have seen very often. Maybe it made it into the mansion, but you haven't really seen it very much. So, without further ado, I'm going to take you on a little trip here. Now, one thing you'll notice... this obviously was going to be a changing portrait. You see that Mark had kind of a wicked sense of humor, right? And one of the reasons I believe that Walt brought Mark to the park was because he felt like Disneyland needed a little bit more of a sense of humor. So Alice, I was wondering, maybe you talk a little bit about Mark's sense of humor. Where did he get that wicked sense of humor?
I think he got his humor from the traveling that he did. He went to almost 20 grammar schools before he graduated from the 6th grade. His father was chasing the rainbow, and always the grass was going to be greener on the other side, but it wasn't. So he kept going. So the shortest time Mark was in the school, he was there for 27 days, and then went to the next one. His humor was from living all over the United States, from state to state and back again and so on, but the home place was in Northern California. Mark was born during the gold rush, oil rush in Bakersfield. And he was born there, but left at 6 months. He found out it was not too great a place to be. So anyway, but his sense of humor was living in all these different places and finding out how the humor was different from each place he went to. Plus the reason he started drawing was because when he would go from school to school, the young boys would get this young kid out onto the playfield when it was recess and just beat the daylights out of him. So he decided he'd start drawing pictures. And so he'd draw pictures of all different kinds of things, and they wouldn't beat him up if he'd give them a painting or a picture. So that's what started him doing it, and that also helped his humor and also helped his body.
But yeah, I think one of the things about Mark's humor that is so interesting is that in Disneyland, it's a whole family park, right? You have kids and adults and grandparents, and somehow Mark knew how to reach, with one joke, a little kid or their grandparents. His humor could reach almost anyone with one single joke, which I think is amazing.
That was why Walt removed him from animation and took him to Disneyland, because he said, it's not funny anymore. He was having Mark at different times do something funny, like the family that was going up a pole with a rhino. That was the first joke Mark put in the park, and so after that Walt would always come and say, we need something funny over here, and that. So he was doing this, and he was doing so well at it, Walt took him out of animation and put him to putting in the shows and rides and jokes at the park.
Yeah, closer to some of the changing portraits we ended up with. This is a witch of Walpurgis, I believe, and then she changes into a little bit more intense there. So his works span everything from kind of true horror to really just silly things. Did Mark Alice? Did Mark have any kind of supernatural reasons or beliefs for this, or was he just trying to look at whatever he thought would would talk to people. In terms of like spookiness, how did he come up with his ideas for what would be haunted or what might be spooky?
See, he not only would do that, but he would always go in and to the library and get out a ton of books, and he would go through books after books after books and write down all the different things. They would go, would be something that the whole family would be interested in.
Okay.
And the humor, how he would put the humor into it, and what style he would put into it.
Okay, because it is interesting. His humor spans everything from silly and gags to ironic, to almost kind of grim. This was one part of a changing portrait. It would have been a bouquet of beautiful roses that changed into this. So, and then some of Mark's concept work. One thing, Tony Baxter, I was speaking with him a little while ago, and he told me Mark Davis' work is interesting in the fact that it had no crutches. He said lots of the artists he's worked with over the years, when they're developing concept art, they got to put a little person in the front, kind of point them and say, "Oh, look over there, that's the joke," or check this out. But Mark would only draw things that you were going to see. Like, he knew exactly the effect it should have on the viewer without having to show you, like, this is how it'll be in the attraction. So this is an example of a scene that he had envisioned for the Haunted Mansion. And Alice, you want to explain what's happening here? I know that you, can you explain this picture, Alice, to us?
Sorry, which one?
That's right. It's the tiger.
Oh, that's one of my favorites. It's the Great Hunter.
Yeah.
And he has his tiger there, and he has parts of it. Instead of putting it just whole, he has like the tail hanging there, and then he has the rug coming up and biting him from the back. And just all different types of things that you wouldn't think a person would do. But it's funny, and that's how Mark would work. He would go into all kinds of information and books and things on tigers, and he would come up with that.
Yeah, and then we're showing him now the ghost in the library taking a bath.
Yeah, the brilliance of Mark's drawings was not only the macabre kind of humor that's very subtle that he just inherently understood. She explained he could make a drawing of a gag with only 2 or 3 little notes about this moves here or that does that. He could walk that drawing over to Maple, which was a division of the company that we manufactured all the animations and different kinds of creatures, and just simply hand it to one technician. That one technician would take a look at it, and in a week or so he's got this whole thing built with all the animated moves and everything in it. You didn't need any technical drawings, you didn't need any engineering of any kind. Nobody between Mark and the guy building the gag. Mark could come back over and look at it and says, yeah, that's what it's supposed to do. It was so efficient way to work, and Mark was the only guy that made drawings that you could immediately understand the gag and you could actually build the gag.
And the ones doing that loved to have him come and look, and then he'd say, I remembered this time, he would say, look, boss, we got it closer this time. And every time he would come in to see it, he would come and look at it, and before I could say anything, they said, this is the closest we've gotten yet, huh, boss? And they were very proud of it, and they wanted the drawing left there for a few days so everybody could see the drawing and how close they came to his drawing.
Well, it was easy to do because his drawings made sense right from the get-go. You didn't have things that were far out or things that had too much extra gag in it. It went right to the heart of the essence of the gag, and everybody could understand. It's so simple.
He was very good at that. I think he was the best at staging things.
So here's Mark's concept for the seance. This one a little bit more, possibly a little more grim, a little more serious, and then there's another one, maybe a little more voodoo, a little sillier. And the cat, of course. I don't know if this is when they were considering having, if the cat's just a character in the scene, or maybe when Exitencio was thinking for a while, maybe a cat would be your guide through the Haunted Mansion. I'm not sure either way, but some ideas he had for that. And then there's another drawing. I like the cat. Got caught up in the whole spell there. So, and then here's some of Mark's concepts for the ballroom. Dancing ghosts. Where did that come from? Well, the end result is pretty literal. Ballroom dancing ghosts, but maybe those are the dancing ghosts up in the corner. And then this, there's grandmother knitting in the ballroom, but this is Mark's idea that who knows exactly what relative of hers she was knitting for. I'm not sure. Someone with a number of arms. And then you can see, and this one is a little bit more not so funny and a little bit more intense. So his sketches really to run the gamut. When he was considering things. And then so this is what Bob was talking about. Like he would just write a little note there. This is what happens, and you could tell exactly what you were supposed to be seeing in the gag. So this is another ballroom gag he had. Someone just dancing on the chandeliers. So now we'll talk about the bride a little bit. This, I believe, is the first bride that was installed in the Haunted Mansion. You wouldn't really see her face, and I'm not certain that it was quite so creepy as it might look there. I think it was all painted black. This is in the light picture, and then with some Mark Davis concepts of the bride. I know, Alice, you were talking to me earlier about the bride, and kind of, maybe you can talk a little bit about Mark's idea about the storylines in the Haunted Mansion.
Well, Mark said that the thing that was most important was to put on a show that you only had 12 to 14, 15 minutes at the most. That you would be looking at something and it would tell you a story, but it had to be a story in pieces, but have it work together. So he said most of the time you would only see maybe 12, 14 seconds of a movement or something, and it had to go into something else that could keep the story going but different. And that was what was the problem with the bride, was you couldn't carry the story of the bride all the way through the show for 14 minutes. When you only had so many seconds per character to go through. Like looking at the bird cage with the gadzooks, I can't remember. But anyway, it was blood in the dish instead of water, and there was a bone instead of seeds and such for the bird. And it had the old-fashioned palm tree that you had in the old houses for decoration. But when you had to go with the bride all the way through, you can't carry a story because you have to have other things going on to keep the interest of going through the show. And with the pirates, you had to have them going very quickly too, because you had lots to cover in a short time, so you couldn't do this. So when you've got a bride that's sitting there and the groom hasn't appeared, and then all of a sudden they have it somewhere else for a few minutes, for a few seconds, and then somewhere else for a few seconds. You have to have a lot of stories going with the position she was in to get to the end. So that's why it was removed and slowed down. And some people liked it and some people didn't, but Mark felt that it gave more of a story.
Yeah, it's interesting that the bride, from the very, very earliest treatments, Ken Anderson had ideas for the haunted house. There's always been this bride in some way, shape, or form, and we still have the bride, and I mentioned that they've kind of gone back and tried to build up her story a little bit with the attic, with the way it is now, but yeah, I mean, and you can see from Mark Davis' concepts that he was trying to, you know, what can we do with this bride if we want to have a bride and tell a story in one little quick scene? What can we do? Maybe she lost her head, maybe she's more of a goofy bride. I think this is interesting in the sense that you see his sketch and then you see the maquette they built, and they are very similar, but they feel very different. You know, his is a little more kind of silly, and that one is a little bit more sinister the way. And that maquette is actually the one that they put into the attic mock-up for the mansion, and I think that's kind of the way they ended up going. Oh, this painting, by the way, with the bride walking her dog, is also at the Walt Disney Family Museum right now. You can see your thoughts and ideas. So you might recognize this. I think it's, I don't know if it's a dog, a hellhound, something that we find in the graveyard. So a lot of Mark's concepts did make it, obviously, into the Haunted Mansion, and that's kind of how he was translated in a horrible flash picture, which doesn't really do justice to what you see. Haunted Mansion is one attraction where it's really true, no flash pictures, because everything will look terrible that you take pictures of if you use a flash in there. And it's interesting, you know, when they were building the animatronics for the Haunted Mansion, they decided to just let you see the nuts and bolts. I mean, that's kind of the skeletal look they wanted to use, rather than trying to imitate bones and things. They just you see the nuts and bolts through a clear skin, right? Do you know anything about their decision to do that? How they came up with the idea to let's just show people the guts of the animatronics? Were you involved with any of that?
Oh, that's really easy. We used clear butyrate plastic, which is a thermoformable flat sheet material. We started doing that in about 1963 as just a standard body part. But obviously, if we build a little armature, a little framework, whether it's animated or not, and you build it kind of goofy, and you simply put the plastic parts on and forget to put the fur on it, you got a ghost dog.
That's right. And then this is just an example of another of Harriet Burns' sculptures of one of Mark's concept drawings that actually made it into the Haunted Mansion, the Ghost Band. I think every set piece in the graveyard was designed by Mark Davis, I believe. I'm not certain of that, but I think it's true. And then another one of his gags, two characters, the executioner and his victim holding his head in his hand while they sing a happy song. And then this is interesting, you know, some character designs. You kind of see a character that kind of made its way to become maybe like the Hatbox Ghost, and another guy that's a very familiar hitchhiker. This is before I think the hitchhiking ghosts were totally worked out, but those characters obviously became, you know, our famous hitchhiking ghosts. Okay, so, and there's, yeah, see, you can see this, just don't put on any skin and you have a ghost, right? This is just for fun. I thought you might like to look at a close-up of little Leota. Now, the thing that's interesting about this is that her skin is obviously painted bright green. In the Haunted Mansion uses a lot of very creative lighting techniques. They use infrared lighting, you know, black lights for a lot of things, but they also use incandescent lighting. And I've heard that that's, maybe, I don't know if you've heard this or not, maybe you can explain, but I've heard that they did that to differentiate between kind of the real world, the living world, and the ghost world. Have you ever heard anything about that?
Yeah, lighting is very tricky. A lot of it goes back to the early days of Disneyland. We had a lot of black light in those days, because that seemed to be the only thing that would, you know, really make something look different. And of course, you know, that ultraviolet light, you could just do painted flats and get away with, you know, something really cheap. but there are certain places that this type of lighting would make a difference between something that is literal and dimensional and something that's kind of implied. So that was still a good tool of lighting.
Yeah, certainly. And yeah, and Haunted Mansion is probably one of the attractions that uses lighting to the most dramatic effect. So that's the end of my slideshow.